Hi everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Really quickly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Sammy Darrow. I work with Biopharma Connections, and we're just here to help eTech run and promote this webinar. So today we'll have Cassy Gardner, the Director of Operations for eTech, presenting. After her presentation, we will have time for a Q&A session. Please feel free to leave your questions using the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screens. And we'll also be recording this webinar. So after it's over, we'll send that to you all shortly. And with that, I'll hand it over to Cassy for the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Sammy. I really appreciate the warm welcome. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking time to join today. Hopefully we can make this worth your while. So what we are talking about is getting the most out of your feed study. And on the docket is a brief introduction of eTech Group, a brief introduction of myself. Then we're going to talk about, at a high level, what is a feed, why you would do one, some examples, some challenges, and some best practices. So we're going to kind of cover the high level around feed. And there's two things I want you to keep in mind. Number one is I've structured the presentation very much as a teaser. The slides will probably take me about 35, 40 minutes. And so we've got plenty of times for questions. I would love to come back and really address the things you're most curious about. So don't be shy about using that Q&A feature in the Zoom so that we can address what you're interested in. And the second thing I want to make sure you know is that I am coming at this from a bias of automation. So I'm an automation engineer through my career. So I'm bringing that perspective to this presentation. The last thing I wanted to note is that my goal for this is to be as fun and as interactive as possible. I know you all can't verbally interact with me due to the webinar format, but would love to hear answers to questions that I ask you in the chat. So I'm going to ask you questions, and please feel free to respond in the chat. And hopefully this will be fun and engaging for all of us. So with that, let's talk about very briefly, who is eTech? So we are a systems integrator. eTech is a consulting firm. We're the folks who help automate manufacturing plants. We're all across North America. We have over 600 employees, 3 panel shops, an electrical installation team, and we serve a number of verticals. So we have different divisions that are focused in different areas. I am personally from the life sciences division, and I'll tell you a bit more about my background in just a second. But the last thing I want to touch on about eTech, and it's something that I'm really proud of about working here, is that we are just as responsive as when I joined the company when we were like 15 to 20 people when I joined 11 years ago. And now we're over 600, and it's been really cool to see us build scale while also maintaining that quality of service and being really nimble. I think it makes it really fun that I get to help my clients with problems in a very responsive way. So that's a quick rundown of eTech, but who are you talking with? Who am I? My name is Cassy. I included below my name there just a little bit about me. I did a core values exercise a few years ago where I tried to identify and name those values that are really, really important to me. They include things like integrity, inclusion, kindness, diligence, curiosity, and humor. So just sharing in case any of you connect with any of those. Would love to hear from you after the webinar or in the chat if any of that resonates. My background is I studied bioengineering. I got a Bachelor of Science in that. I joined what was at the time Banks Integration as an automation engineer intern, and I've been at the company for 11 years. Through that 11 years, I moved into project management, and then I began running a small division of the company in Vacaville. In my time with the company, I have run over 10 feed studies. I've managed projects of over $3 million, including 20 plus automation team members and many different stakeholders and companies involved. I've managed projects internationally, in California, out of state, and I've had a lot of fun and adventures. It's been really great. So that's just a tiny bit about me. But I'm curious, who are you? So take a minute and throw in the chat what your general role is and your industry. Are you in construction? Are you in finance? Are you in life sciences? Are you food and bev? Are you an automation engineer? I did take a look at the registration roster ahead of the webinar today, and I noticed a number of titles that seem like there's some high-level folks who might be responsible for project planning. There's a number of engineers who might be joining us. So I'm going to keep this, I see some life science construction in the chat. I'm going to keep this pretty broad because I have a pretty broad audience, but I hope it's still useful. And again, we can come back and dive into whatever you're most interested in. Okay, more life sciences. Hello, life sciences folks. Great. Oh, good. I'm seeing lots of folks in the chat. Thank you. All right. So another question for you. What does a successful project look like? When you think about a successful project, what are the qualities it has? Feel free to throw some stuff in the chat if you like. But I'll go ahead and kind of spoil it here. For me, oh, aligned expectations. I like that, Gagneet. For me, the very basics of a successful project are on time, on budget, on scope, and of high quality. So you want to get what you paid for at the time you paid for it and at a high quality. So I'm seeing some folks agreeing in the chat. And the reason that I'm bringing this up right now is I want us to have that in mind as we think about feed studies. What does success look like for a project? And I'm just making sure I see some questions in the chat. So I'm just double checking. All right. Good. So we've talked about the foundation of a successful project. So what the heck is a feed? What is a feed study? First off, I'm going to give you the very basic definition. It stands for front-end engineering and design. I'm guessing the folks who joined this probably knew that acronym already, but just in case, that's what it stands for. And I want you to imagine you are going to remodel your kitchen. Is the first thing you do when you remodel your kitchen rip out the kitchen sink? Or do you sit down and make a plan for how to be most effective, decide exactly what you want to do? Maybe you're negotiating with your significant other about what appliances you want, the color of the paint. You're sitting down and you're scoping the project and you're making a plan for how you're going to execute it. That is a really great analogy for what a feed study is. So think of an upfront planning process and phase of a project. Projects get executed in phases, and that will lead to some success if you create a strong foundation. So I also want to define another acronym that you may hear often associated with feed in industry. That acronym is front-end loading, FEL. And I'm showing here a graphic from Freeman T. Duga. This kind of, I thought, gave a nice illustration of some project phases and how a project gets executed. It kind of starts with, hey, we've got a general idea. We think there may be a business case here. You drill down a little further and you define the scope at a high level. And then you get into the feed where you start to actually produce design deliverables, very specific documents and drawings that show exactly what's going to get done. For example, you might have a spreadsheet that says, I am going to buy all of these materials for my new kitchen. So that's just trying to make it concrete for the folks who may not be in life sciences or automation or construction. But that gives you a nice layout of the phases. One thing I wanted to share with my automation bias and perspective is that often when we get to the feed stage for an automation project, here it's showing that the business case would already be kind of fully fleshed out. The scope of services would be solid. But my experience has been there's really actually quite a lot of scoping to still be done for automation at this point. My feeling is that is because automation comes last in a project. And so you have to have all the other upfront design kind of figured out before you start getting into automation. So you're going to see that some of the things that we address in the feed studies I have been involved in may look like they fall in FEL1 or FEL2, but really just use that kitchen remodel analogy. A feed is that upfront planning. So what are the deliverables you would get from a feed study? I've included a list here of things that you might want to ask for, or you might want to see if you're an owner, or if you might want to provide if you're a partner. Cataloging the stakeholders, cataloging the requirements, a matrix for how to make decisions, a decision log, a scope of work. Again, coming back to that kitchen remodel, you're spending time making a good plan. Maybe during your planning of the kitchen remodel, you realize, oh shoot, it looks like lead times for the kitchen sink I want are like 2 months. So I better adjust how I'm executing my plan so that I'm not without a kitchen sink for 2 months. You're going to identify risks and mitigation tactics during that too. So feel free if you have questions or comments on this list of deliverables, we can come back to it, or you can ask them now. But thinking back to our foundation of what is a successful project and knowing the deliverables that you would get out of a project, why would you do a feed study? In the end, it all comes down to the list I've got here. There are other benefits as well, but these are the main ones. You are reducing risk for your project. You are reducing the likelihood that you get all the way to the end of your project and you discover that one of your stakeholders really needed something and you have not addressed it in the scope of work. And now you have to scramble at higher costs and probably a longer schedule to address those needs. So maybe you and your significant other had a miscommunication and they really, really needed the wine fridge. And you didn't get the wine fridge, and now you have to rip out a cabinet to make space for the wine fridge. That would be a late stage change order. But this gives you some sense. You're identifying risk. You also, because you're identifying and mitigating risks and making a stronger plan, that will reduce your costs. You don't have to buy the expedited wine fridge. You will get the wine fridge on the first go, and your overall schedule will be shorter. You will not rip out the kitchen sink and then realize that it'll take 2 months to get it. You'll have a shorter downtime for your project. You're also evaluating, hey, if I install a place to tap a keg in my kitchen, I can save money and I can purchase kegs of beer instead of individual cases of canned beer, and there will be a return on my investment. Right? So you can look at things like that during the feed study to choose how you approach your project and what should be in the scope. And at the end, you get that detailed scope, a cost associated with what you're planning to buy or planning to do, and a schedule for that. You also can then take those deliverables, and if you're an owner, work with your capital funding team to get approval for the project, knowing those details. And then lastly, you're getting often detailed design specs that you would need regardless, you would need them to execute the project either way. So those would maybe things like software design spec or a functional requirement spec in an automation space, for example. So we've talked about what is a feed and why do one at a high level. And I'm going to give, again, some high level examples of past feed studies. These are some different feed studies that I personally have been involved in through the years. So you can see a feed applies for multiple different industries. Just me personally, I've addressed life sciences feeds, food and bev, solar cell manufacturing, lots of different areas and in many different geographies. Canada, Atlanta, Southern California, the Bay Area, etc. So let's dive in to a couple of those, actually 4 of those feed studies, and talk about what were the outcomes of the feed study, or what was the questions that the feed study addressed for those different clients. So the first one I want to take you through is for a client in the San Francisco Bay Area. They produce therapies for rare and ultra rare genetic diseases. The challenge they had at their site was very significant obsolescence in their install base of their control automation platform. So that led to big questions for them. How should they address this obsolescence? What was the roadmap for automation at the whole site? Which automation platform should they choose? What were the needs? And then how can they make this upgrade and make these switches to address that obsolescence in the most efficient way possible? So these were all the questions this client had when we started the feed study with them. And by the end of the feed study, we produced a lot of the deliverables that we looked at on the prior slide, detailing exactly what they needed to do, helping them choose which platform was the right platform for the site, things of that nature, so that they could address this with a really clear and concrete plan. Another feed study was in the Atlanta area. And this client had a solar cell production facility that had been mothballed for a number of years. They were in a position where they were looking to get that same facility back into production as quickly as possible. So they're revitalizing an old plant. And they had questions like, what can we reuse? What is the fastest way to get into production? How quick is the quickest? How much automation do they actually need for their day one, production? What are the requirements associated with that? What platform should they use? Where are the risk areas for the project? How much is this going to cost? Just straight up, what is the scope that needs to get done for the automation? So it's very similar in terms of, we started with these many different types of questions, some of which could be very open-ended, and completed the feed study resolving those questions for them. We conducted site studies, developed design specs, and had a lot of really close collaboration with the client to figure out what we could do for them very quickly to get them into production. Another example is for a cultivated meat client. This client was really looking at, hey, we're building our first pilot scale manufacturing plant. When it comes to they had never run a production facility before. They had never had any automation systems before. So they were really looking from a very high level of, what do they need, from an automation system? How should it be designed? They needed flexibility, the ability to adjust and innovate for their product. They had a short, aggressive timeline. They had no idea what the costs were going to be like. So we really worked with them to address those questions through a feed. The last example I will give is for another Bay Area, SF Bay Area client who was making a new production facility, very similar to the cultivated meat facility, but looking at, what do they need for this new facility? What should automation look like? What's the scope, etc. So I gave you a few examples there. I'm happy to come back to any of those during the Q&A if there's more you'd like to learn. But now I would like to talk a little bit about, what are the challenges of executing a feed study? And if anyone has any thoughts about what those challenges might be, I would welcome seeing those in the chat. But I will share my perspective and would love to hear yours. So to me, the challenges associated with feed study are, first and foremost, my own experiences. They are addressing very open-ended questions. So when you ask a question like, what automation platform is the right platform for my facility, my production? There's a lot of different stakeholders. There's a lot of different needs. It's challenging. It's a challenging question to answer because it depends a lot on many different variables. So what that results in is a need for a lot of collaboration and investigation. A partner working really closely with an owner to figure out what is the context and what are the needs and what will the best solution be for them. So when you're working on something that's really investigative and collaborative, that means it's hard to estimate. It is hard to give a firm number that says it's going to cost exactly X dollars, and you're going to have an answer to all your very open-ended questions. So that definitely creates some challenges, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The other thing is, especially when it comes to automation, stakeholder engagement and buy-in is a big part of the process. We, the partner, need to understand the needs from the owner, and the partner needs to share information and really have that open dialogue. But there's a lot of people who have to be involved. And so it takes a serious commitment from the owner to be engaged in the process. And then another challenge is that it relies heavily on the experience of the partner, or in this case for me, and the integrator. You will be limited by the knowledge that the integrator has on the various platforms, for example, or on the different scopes or approaches they've seen in the past. So it's something to think critically about in terms of that. So knowing those are the challenges, how do you overcome those? What are the best practices? So what we have come to through the years doing these different feed studies is a process. And I'm going to take you through the feed process and how I think about it. Would love to hear any reflections that you'd like to share on the process, or if you've seen it done differently. Very curious about that. For me, the feed process comes in 3 major stages. The first is setting up a framework for making decisions. How are you going to agree together with all of those different stakeholders and all of the different perspectives? How are you going to make decisions? And then once you agree on, as a team, this is how decisions will be made, you can evaluate the options you have ahead of you using that framework. And then the last step is really planning for that chosen option. So trying to riff off of our kitchen remodel analogy, you and your significant other agree that you are going to make decisions by, you're going to arm wrestle over each choice. And whoever wins the arm wrestling gets their preference on a different choice. That would be one example. Maybe not the best way to approach decision making, but it is a framework. And E-Tech has some different frameworks that might be better than arm wrestling. And then stage 2 would be, using those, evaluating your 2 options with the framework. So the actual conducting of the arm wrestling. Stage 3 would be, okay, I won the arm wrestle about the wine fridge. So now we're going to plan how to get the wine fridge in the kitchen. Okay, so within stage 1, this is how we think about and approach making a framework for decisions. Very first, you have to identify and involve all of the right stakeholders. In automation, this is challenging because there are so many different users and people who support an automation system. But you've got to get them involved, you've got to get them engaged so that you can make sure you uncover the needs and you avoid that risk of late stage change orders. So step 1, identify and involve the stakeholders, and this is in partnership with the owner and any suppliers who are involved. Then from those stakeholders, you need to understand what are their needs or desired outcomes. What are the things they're looking for to get out of this project? Once you understand those things, you can lay out, these are the criteria, the decision criteria. For example, we want to consider, before we make a choice, we want to consider how much will it cost? We want to consider what is the schedule? How long will it take to implement? We also want to consider which of these options is most flexible. Those are some examples that you might have in your decision criteria. Oops. There we go. And once you've got those all laid out, you can identify the options. So You could be considering cost and schedule. Maybe those are your two primary motivators. And you could say, in the kitchen remodel, I'm considering these two different sinks. Which one is cheaper and which one will get here faster? And that will help you evaluate the two options against that criteria. And then you make a decision. You say, oh, great, I'm gonna get this sink that is cheaper and faster. But you could run into a scenario where one sink is cheaper but slow, and the other sink is faster but more expensive. And you might say cost is less important to me than schedule. And you're using relative decision criteria. And that's something we often see come into play as we define the decision criteria, relative weightings and importance. Okay, so back to stage 2 where you're evaluating the options. You evaluate against the criteria, you reach a decision, and then you document your rationale and assumption. This is a really important step in the process. This is important because you may have stakeholders change through the years, and you may need to come back and help them understand why certain decisions were made. Or you may make a decision on, relying on certain assumptions, and the environment in your business may change, and those assumptions may be no longer valid, and it may be worth reconsidering certain things about what you did and what you planned for. So this is really important, and I've seen clients have to come back to this type of documentation regularly after completing a feed process. And then once you reach that decision, then you're getting into the execution phase for that chosen option. You're really detailing out all of the steps, every single thing you're going to buy, how much of this is going to cost, how long are they going to take. And that's the execution phase. The last thing I wanted to highlight about the process is that for this to be successful between a partner and an owner, it really requires a lot of collaboration, communication, and regular reporting on the status. So if you're an owner and you're managing a partner, you want to hear from them regularly on how things are going, and you need them to really drive this process. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So the recipe for success on a feed study. From my perspective, it is having a process and working the process. It enables your stakeholders to know you are here and you have this much farther to go, and this is how we're going to get from point A to point B together. You also have a proactive drive for the feed study. My experience has been feed studies are typically executed on a time and material basis. And that's because of that element we talked about earlier where they're challenging to estimate. So if you are giving an integrator or a partner some of your money, you want to make sure that they are spending it how you want it spent. And I'm going to show you some examples of forecasting that I would recommend you ask for. But you want to have frequent forecasting so you know that your time and material money is being spent how you like it. You've got good communication, and you've got a schedule from your partner, kind of making sure things are on track, and it's holding both the partner and the owner accountable to these agreed upon timelines. And again, you need to have owner committed resources, not just a consultant. The owner, in the end, have to be the one saying what are the needs, and they've got to be responsive to answering those types of questions. We touched on the good documentation already. And because of the challenges with estimating these types of projects, it's often a good idea for an owner to carry some contingency if they execute a project like this. And then in the end, you want to make sure you have a partner who's got experience doing these types of things so they can lead you through it and make sure you're successful together. And then the last thing I'll touch on this slide is that I put a little graph, very basic, but just showing the more you invest in this planning process, the higher your confidence that you will not have risks manifest later, that you have a good plan, and you can finish that project on those successful criteria, on time, on budget, all that good stuff. So if you sit down and plan your kitchen remodel for 15 minutes with a napkin, you may have different outcomes compared to investing, a week planning in some spreadsheets and things with your significant other. So coming back to forecasting, I wanted to show an example of what you as an owner, if you're an owner, or maybe if you're a consultant, should think about providing when it comes to forecasting. So you should make sure you're seeing on a regular basis with your partner how much time have you invested in each task. Actually, let me back up, orient you here. We've got a list of all the tasks involved. We've got the spent, how many hours have they already put into that task? And then they should be giving you proactively how many hours they think it's going to take to finish that part of the planning process. That way you're getting frequent updates and you can hear from them early on if there's going to be an issue, or you can choose to stop work in a certain area or reallocate budget between the various tasks to make sure that you've got your money's worth from the project. And I'm just showing a simple graph here that I like to use. It shows you, like in this particular case, we've spent 4% of the budget, which is blue. We're forecasting that we'll need another 85% of the total budget. And then the last little slice, the gray slice there, it looks like, hey, we're going to have maybe some money left over. Things are going really well, for example. It just gives you an idea of some tools you can use and think about when you approach these projects with a partner. And again, just because this is an open-ended collaborative process or project doesn't mean you shouldn't have a schedule. So the schedule you see here, it's just a very rough example. It aligns with the process that we looked at on the previous slide. And it gives you a sense of how long is it going to take to kind of get through each of those steps. And a strong partner should be willing to commit to timelines on these things. But both the partner and owner have to be flexible together as the project evolves to try and adjust to what's needed at the time. So in summary, I've shown you what is a feed, what are some examples, why you might want to do one, and what are the challenges. We also looked at some best practices and processes. This was really a teaser to kind of get you started with regarding, what a feed study is and how you might approach it effectively. And if you have additional questions, I would love to hear them. Please feel free to share. So while you add your questions to the chat, I will just mention, you'll get this at the end of the webinar, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you want to follow up or learn more. I've also been a guest on the CSIA podcast. If you want to hear about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the automation industry, you can check out my website at yallowmation.org. And if you're curious about working with eTech, please reach out to Doug McDowell. He's very sweet and kind, and I totally stole the kitchen remodel from his stories he likes to tell in client meetings. So with that, I will come back to see what kind of questions we have here. Okay, oh good, all right. So we've got, can a feed study have scope creep? And if yes, how do you avoid it or fix it? Yes, short answer is yes. Very often they have scope creep. So folks, when you're, sorry, I'm getting really good questions. They're making me laugh. Scope creep is when folks want to get more than what was originally agreed on. So because feed studies are so collaborative, it's very easy for scope creep to happen. And what I would come back to is the best way to avoid scope creep is this really frequent, regular forecasting and conversation. So I could have a client ask me, hey, well, we were wondering about this other option. And I could say, oh, okay, well, looking back at what we budgeted, we had this much time to evaluate options. We can look at that, but it's probably going to take us an extra 20 hours. Where would you like to pull 20 hours out of the other tasks? And then you can use this as a tool to agree together what is most important to the client to spend the money they want to have, the way they want to have it spent. And then let's see. Ooh, another question. So during the decision-making phase, how do you broker conflicts among stakeholders? So there is no easy answer to this. This is a really challenging, it's a very challenging question, but it comes back to the best practices we talked about, which is you have, before you get into the process of evaluating the options, you need to get the stakeholders in agreement on how they are going to make decisions. If they have agreed to the process of these are the decision criteria and these are the relative importance of those criteria, then when somebody gets an outcome at the end that they weren't hoping for and a different option is chosen, you can come back to and say, well, this was the process we agreed to. And ultimately, you know, we're all trying to work towards the same goal. And this is what the general team agreed on. And there's a softer side of managing that conflict as well, of course, you know, having the conversations, listening and validating to any concerns that you might hear. All those things are very challenging, but great questions so far. Let's see. Okay. I got another question. So you talked about the stakeholders on the customer side. Who are the key people or roles involved on the integrator side of the team? So I'll touch on both. So in my experience on the owner side, you have folks like an automation team, IT, quality, EH&S, operations, MSAT. I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting that as I rattle things off, but you've got many different stakeholders who use the system. And then on the integrator side, typically a feed study project like this has a project manager and then subject matter experts on a few different key areas, whether that be a certain automation platform or on a certain bio process, like a TFF expert or a UFDF expert coming in. So just a couple of examples. Great questions. And while I let a few more questions roll in, something else I wanted to touch on that I often get is, let's see, it looks like I've got one more. Oh, okay, nice. So Josh, you asked from the integrator perspective, how do you recommend handling a disengaged system owner, e.g. too busy or not providing feedback or questions until given final deliverable? Super challenging. I touched on the importance of this. It sounds like maybe you've got some experience here too. How I have managed this in the past is really by trying to get ahead of it at the start of the project, making sure the owner understands what is expected of them so that you've got that upfront agreement about what the process is going to look like. And you can come back to them and say, hey, you know, we agreed that it would take at least 2 hours a week of your time to address this, and we're not seeing that. It's really tough being a partner, being a vendor in that situation. The leverage is a little tough. So you can also consider things like letting them know, hey, it doesn't seem like this project is a priority to you. Should we cancel the project? And then see if they're really engaged. And another idea for how to handle a disengaged customer is you may have submitted all the deliverables and then you start getting the feedback at the very end. I definitely just recommend a direct conversation. Hey, you know, we solicited this feedback weeks ago from you. Unfortunately, we don't have the budget to address this feedback now. We're happy to help you and continue to address this feedback, but we will need additional budget due to the timing that this has come in. Okay, those are my 3 tips for Josh. Farshid, yes, the presentation will come at the end. Everybody will get access to it. And then another question, why would I use an SI for a feed study as opposed to a large engineering firm? So this is a great question. It depends on the scope of the questions that you want answered, the design you want done. So a large engineering firm, like an EPC, they're going to help you design different elements. An SI, a system integrator, is going to be really strong in helping you with your automation questions. So I would strongly recommend if you have automation questions, you should come to an SI who has knowledge in multiple platforms so that they can help you really consider all your options in depth. It's It's a different skill set. EPCs sometimes have small automation teams, but often they don't have the level of intimacy and experience with the automation platforms and details that a real system integrator will have. Let's see if I'm getting any more. Okay, so a question I often get when I talk about feed studies is how much does a feed study cost? And I'll just answer that for folks to know. It varies widely. I have done feed studies for, $25,000 to $250,000. So they vary widely, and it really just depends on what the owner's circumstance is. And it comes back to the slide I showed with the level of investment versus confidence needed. So that's a common question, and often it comes in two scenarios. The customer will come and say, hey, I have a challenge. I'd like to invest some money getting this challenge resolved. And either the partner, the integrator, can put together an estimate, or the owner can say, I have this much money. How confident can you get within this budget? And you should really be looking for a partner who's willing to work with you in either format and be flexible and figure out what they can do for you within your budget. And that follow-on question there, or associated question, is how long does it take? And it's very similar. It depends on the level of engagement from the owner, and then the amount of investment they're making at the time, and also what their schedule needs are. So you should be looking for a partner who's willing to be flexible on timelines. Let's see. So I've got another question in the chat. The main concerns from customers during the feed study phase typically revolve around ensuring that their project objectives are met within the budget and timeline while adhering to quality standards and return on investment. How does eTech address these? Yeah, so I think that comes back to our process. We've got our feed study process here, and it's really like at this stage here where you're identifying the desired outcomes, you're really working with the stakeholders to get this part solid, make sure it's well understood. And then we execute and follow a formal process to try and deliver on that. Hopefully that answers the question. Right. I'll give you folks another maybe 2 minutes to add some more questions. If they keep rolling in, we'll stay on longer. But if they don't, then we can sign off. I'm just going back to my notes to see if there was any other bonus content I wanted to share. Okay, we covered the bonus content I had noted down. Oh, I've got one more. Ooh, what is an example of your most successful outcomes in clients' terms? Oh, this is a great question. Gosh, this is hard for me to frame. I think the most, we come back to the visual aid here. Oh, PowerPoint's freaking out. Okay, sorry, stand by. Anyways, I won't give you visual aid. The most successful outcome I would like to highlight is that for our cultivated meat client, that project was was a super fun project. I just really enjoyed the whole thing. B, they were operating on an incredibly aggressive timeline. So spending time with them upfront and early, this applies to the Georgia project also, but spending time with them upfront and early to figure out things while they were still designing other aspects of the system allowed us to really meet their schedule timeline. And during the project, we were really helping them. Let me back up. We did both the feed study and the implementation of the system we designed during the feed study for this client. And because we spent the time in the feed study understanding things, working closely with them, we knew what they needed in terms of our partnership, and we were able to really help them drive a lot of the execution to meet the schedule. So that was something I really enjoyed, and it was a cool outcome of having this really collaborative relationship. Oh, our least successful outcome. What did you learn and how did it help the future clients? Oh, good. Okay, so least successful outcome. We had one client in particular who was, asked for a feed study. And it was really, they were in a really challenging financial environment where their budgets were so tight around automation. And they just unfortunately went into the feed study knowing the budget for the feed study. That was all very clear. But as we started designing the system for them and giving them a rough idea of what the system would cost at the end of implementation, it was just much, much higher than anything they had imagined or planned for. They were like, this is what automation costs for a factory. Um, so, so the lessons learned there, I think, actually, we did okay. We shared early and often kind of what those costs were trending towards, what they looked towards. But unfortunately, the client was just in a situation like a startup environment, and they weren't able to move forward. So that was a challenging feed study, but they all are challenging in different ways, but so fun because they're so collaborative. Okay, another one. What are the most common technology or process areas where customers are willing to undergo a feed? What are the specific, okay, yeah. So we touched on a number of the specific challenges. I'm trying to, Patricia, thank you for the question. I'm trying to decide how to answer this. What are the most common technology or process areas where customers are willing to undergo a feed? My experience has been customers are really interested in answering these big picture type questions with the feed, such as what is the right automation platform for the site? That is a common question we're helping clients answer. So uncovering the needs around the automation platform as a whole and helping them try and differentiate the options compared to their needs. So we've run into that a lot. There's also sometimes systems where it's a unique process. It's never been done before. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, so it carries a lot of risk. So in those scenarios, it's definitely worthwhile to do more planning and put together a structure and a foundation to be successful. I'm really enjoying the questions. Thank you all. These are all great. Maybe while a few more questions roll in, I could ask, show of hands, who has been, you can use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, but who has been involved in a feed study themselves in the past? See a couple hands going up, Jim and Josh, Ferdinand. I see a lot of fun names I know on here. Thanks for attending, folks. Okay, so a handful of folks have been involved, looks like. Not a ton. A little bit surprising to me, but that's good. I'm glad you're here. Okay, I have one more piece of bonus content, and then we'll take maybe one or two more questions, and we can call it a wrap here. Just real quick, let me show you a tool that I often use, not this one in particular. I've just pulled up a random website. So just so you know, this random website gives you a cute little illustration of a decision matrix. This is a weighted decision matrix in particular. So I just wanted to share, this is a tool we often use to help our clients in that decision-making framework stage. Very simple. You've got different category like cost and schedule on the left-hand side. You've got different level of importance, like cost is more important to me than schedule. You rate the different things and then you multiply those by the weight, and that helps you make a decision in the end about your options. So just wanted to give a quick illustration of that. All right, so we'll just hang tight for a couple minutes, see if we get any more questions. But if folks drop off, oh, thanks, Ferdinand. You're welcome. Glad you're here. And yeah, if any more questions roll in, I'll answer them. If not, I hope everyone has a great day if you sign off before I do. Thanks, Justin. All right, looks like I'm seeing a lot of folks signing off. Thank you all so much. Really appreciated your time and engagement. And I hope you got something good out of this. You can always, again, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to Doug if you're ever interested in working with us.